evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Latino Voices. I'm Joanna Hernandez. On the show tonight,
is now impacting the people of Chicago in a very dramatic way.
The number of migrants in Chicago surpasses 17,000. A look at what's being done to help them and what impact it's having on the city. Plus, we explore what's driving millions of Venezuelans to flee their home country in the first place.
So how do you say cake?
Keke.
Keke?
Keke.
And you might know the word hola, which means hi in Spanish, but there are other Spanish words that change depending on where you're from. And now to some of today's top stories. A WTTW News investigation is raising questions about whether Chicago Public Schools' background check system is operating as intended. This after WTTW News finds at least 2 CPS security guards were suspended last month. Both were former Chicago police officers who have been fired by the department and are on the city's do not hire list. Records show one security guard who has been working at Lane Tech since 2021 was terminated by CPD following allegations of sexual misconduct involving a minor. The other is a Kenwood Academy security guard who was ousted by the police department because of a string of domestic violence incidents, according to CPD disciplinary files. A senior CPS official says there are no misconduct allegations involving students connected to either of these 2 individuals in their current roles. In response to questions, CPS says as part of the hiring process, all CPS applicants, including security guards, undergo robust criminal background checks. There's much more on this investigation on our website. Ousted Northwestern football coach Pat Fitzgerald is firing back with a lawsuit of his own. Fitzgerald's attorney filed a lawsuit today against the university and its president, claiming Fitzgerald was wrongfully terminated. Fitzgerald was fired nearly 3 months ago after allegations that hazing in the football program took place under his watch.
And yes, we're claiming additional damages well beyond $130 million. Make no mistake about it. We don't make any apology about that. He and his family are entitled, like anyone else under Illinois law, if they actually have experienced the university intentionally inflicted emotional distress on his family, and that is actually a claim in the lawsuit that they're entitled to. And we're going to let a jury decide that.
Fitzgerald has maintained that he did not know about any hazing. In response to the lawsuit, a Northwestern spokesperson says Fitzgerald, quote, had the responsibility to know that hazing was occurring and to stop it. He failed to do so. We remain confident that university acted appropriately in terminating Fitzgerald, and we will vigorously defend our position in court. Up next, the United States' role in Venezuela's economic crisis that's driving millions to flee to the southern border. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices, is made possible in part by the support of these donors.
The Biden administration is resuming deportation flights for Venezuelan migrants. This comes as more than 7 million Venezuelans have fled their country in recent years due to political and economic turmoil. A local specialist says he believes the U.S. has had a key role in that crisis, which has resulted in over 17,000 new arrivals at Chicago's doorstep. Joining us now with more on Venezuela's crisis is Juan Gonzalez, a senior fellow at the Great Cities Institute at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure to be here.
Now, the first question, the top story, Biden is resuming deportation flights for Venezuelan migrants, something we haven't seen this year. What's the significance of this?
Well, I think that the president is trying to find any way to be able to solve the crisis. The problem is that the United States and Venezuela have had very poor relations now for years, and diplomatic relations have been frayed. So it's going to be difficult to send people back to a country where you haven't gotten the permission of the president of that country to bring people back. So we'll see what's going to happen with those flights.
And you stated the U.S. has played a role in Venezuela's economic crisis, leading millions to flee. Can you explain what you mean by that, and how deep does this go?
Yeah, I think people have to understand. A few years ago, we were talking largely about a migrant crisis of Hondurans, Guatemalans, and Salvadorans. Before that, largely of Mexicans. What has been the difference in the surge right now? The government's own records show that this year, 400,000 people have already applied for asylum, and they come. Half of them come from just 3 countries. Venezuela is number 1, Cuba is number 2, and Nicaragua is number 4. What do these countries have in common? They've all been targeted by the United States government for sanctions now for years, and our own government has been driving down the economy of these countries. And what happens when people can't find jobs and when they can't eat? They try to go somewhere else where they can survive. And people don't risk going thousands of miles with their children, risking their lives, if there's not a good reason for it. So I think we've got to understand that our policies are fueling the migration crisis, especially in regard to these 3 countries, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua.
And let's mention a very dangerous jungle that they have to cross. And I want to go back to sanctions. How do sanctions work for those who don't know, and how has that impacted Venezuelans' day-to-day life?
Well, we have to understand Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. It was, for many years, the country with the highest standard of living in South America. The decline of Venezuela's economy is not just a result of mismanagement by the government, but again, the U.S. policies. Back in 2015, President Obama issued an executive order claiming that the situation in Venezuela was an extraordinary, and I'm quoting, an extraordinary threat to the national security and the foreign policy of the United States. How exactly a country hundreds of miles away in South America with a very small army is a threat to the United States is beyond me. But at that point, Obama began to institute sanctions, making it very difficult for U.S. companies to work in Venezuela, for foreign banks to lend money to Venezuela. Then Donald Trump comes in and makes things even worse. He seized the assets, froze the assets of Citgo Petroleum. Everyone knows Citgo. We see the gas stations. Citgo produces $24 billion in revenue. It's a Venezuelan-owned company. It's got $3 billion in profits. None of that money can go to Venezuela because the United States government has frozen it. They froze the gold reserves of Venezuela together with the United Kingdom. They've basically made it impossible for Venezuela to do business. And one report says that between that 17 to 31 billion dollars in revenues have been lost by Venezuela in just the 3 years that these sanctions were in effect as a result of U.S. policies.
So there's no surprise that thousands of Venezuelans are fleeing to the United States.
No, it's not. In fact, the president of Mexico today, López Obrador, and the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, both said the basis for this surge is a result of the economic sanctions that the United States has created on Cuba and Venezuela. Because understand, everyone's focusing on the Venezuelans. More Cubans have come to the United States in the last couple of years than ever before in history, than came during the Mariel boat lift of 1980, than came during the Balseros of 1994. This is the biggest migration of Cubans. The only reason you're not seeing it across the United States is because most of the Cubans are going to Florida. They're not going all over to other parts of the United States.
I want to bring a different perspective. We know Ukrainians are also fleeing to Chicago right now due to the Russia-Ukrainian war. How is the government handling care for them versus Latin American migrants?
Well, it's a very distinct difference in that we've had 31,000 applications for Ukrainians to come to Chicago, to the Chicago area. More than 21,000 have already come and the rest are on the way. We're not hearing anything about Ukrainians sleeping in police stations or out in the streets or having to beg because they're being provided all kinds of assistance by the federal government, Medicaid assistance, relocation assistance, immediate work permits. I think the big problem would be resolved as Congressman Chuy Garcia and all the Latino elected officials said in a letter to President Biden. Those elected officials from Chicago said to President Biden yesterday, give work permits, not only to those Venezuelans and Cubans, but to many of the other undocumented that are here in the United States. Because here's a little secret that Chuy Garcia put in this letter that a lot of people don't know. There are 10 million unfilled jobs in the United States right now. There are not enough workers for the employers of the country, and yet here are people who are asking, just give us work authorization, just allow us to survive pending the resolution of our asylum requests.
Give them the opportunity.
Give us a chance to fend for ourselves.
That's very true. Well, thank you so much for this informative conversation, Juan Gonzalez. Up next, the latest on the city's handling of migrants while calls for federal help grow louder. Stay with us. Nearly a month after Mayor Brandon Johnson announced plans to move the more than 3,000 migrants living in police stations and airports into winterized tents, Chicago officials have yet to identify a location for where they will go. Officials are hoping these base camps could shelter, feed, and care for as many as 1,000 migrants in a single location.
We are not just simply looking for brick and mortar, but we have these base camps that we are prepared to drive stakes in the ground to be able to meet this moment. It's a tremendous sacrifice for the people of Chicago, and I certainly recognize how hard it has been for the people of Chicago.
This plan comes amid rising criticism from progressive political organizations and Governor J.B. Pritzker. Joining us now for a deeper dive into the impact and longer-term solutions are Baltasar Enriquez, president of the Little Village Community Council, Cristina de la Rosa, executive director of Erie Neighborhood House, Annie Gramenberg, lead organizer for District 15 at the Police Station Response Team, and Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa of the 35th Ward. We also invited Mayor Johnson's administration and Governor Pritzker's administration, but did not receive a response. We thank you all for being here, though.
Thank you for having us.
Now, there's a lot to discuss. Now, let's start with Garda's World's $29 million contract to set up tent camps for migrants. The contract has been criticized. I want to hear from all of you. Alderman Ramirez Rosa, I want to start with you. You recently said there is no easy decision with the crisis. Could this be the right move, and how soon could these tents go up?
So this administration is committed to making sure that we are integrating and protecting new arrivals to our city. And we've done this with very little support from the federal or state government. 29,000 Ukrainian refugees have resettled in the city of Chicago. All of those refugees received federal government assistance for apartments, for housing, for hotels. We have not seen that same level of assistance for Venezuelan refugees or Central American refugees. And so the city has stood up 23 brick and mortar shelters. That's one every 6 days since the start of this term on May 15th. That's a record pace if you know everything that goes into opening up a shelter. Despite that record pace, unfortunately, the number of buses has increased. We had a record yesterday. We have over 3,000 people right now sleeping on police station floors. And so that's why the administration had to make the very difficult decision of going with a essentially what's a prefabricated shelter. And unfortunately, there's not that many companies that do that. And unfortunately, in this case, we can't wait 6 months or a year to go through a full procurement process. And that's why the city piggybacked off of the state's contract to move as quickly as possible to get people off police station floors.
And Annie, I want to go to your part of a local group helping migrants outside of police stations. What were your concerns when you read the contract?
You know, so this is a 151-page contract that is quite similar in some ways to the contracts, to the POs related to the favored healthcare staffing contract. I think this is, we're buying into a fix this problem solution where there's really only so many companies that can do what a company like Garda World is doing. We've had a lot of pushback within the volunteer network because we're really concerned about the conditions that a company like Garda World is going to bring to the city of Chicago, especially in light of the conditions that we're seeing existing in shelters right now. I don't see within this contract a lot of protections for the people who live within them. There's a lot of internal reporting, and I'd like to know where the oversight comes from from the state government, from DFSS, to make sure that the people who are living there are going to be taken care of. There is within this contract, there's some language about subcontracting, and I know that the carrot, if it were, as you were, for the Brandon administration or the Johnson administration has really been that perhaps we will be able to bring others into caring for and providing some of the services. The language around subcontracting is there, but I'd like to see a little bit more I'd like to see a little bit more fleshed out. I don't see that as part of what we're signing on for with this Garda World contract. Again, there's a lot of experts in urban refugees. The city has consulted, work at the University of Chicago and other institutions within the city. I don't understand why this is the gold standard for an urban center like Chicago for dealing with a migrant population. That said, I'm completely sympathetic to what the alderman was saying, that this is unprecedented. We've never seen this before. And to come up with a solution that is actually going to be able to work within the number of weeks that we have before, as we all know, living in Chicago, the weather is going to turn. It's going to be very cold. And the Venezuelans who are living at the 15th are cold when it's 70 degrees out. So
I think also,
really
as you mentioned, I think what we all have thought, we only thought it was going to be a couple hundreds. Now we're seeing millions. Baltasar, I want to go to you. What were your first thoughts when you read the contract or when you heard about it? You've been helping people from the start.
So, I mean, this is, we're looking for ideas and solutions. But sometimes the solutions is just not to put a Band-Aid. And bringing these tents is not a solution. I've been on the border and they're in the hot. And bringing them to a cold area, we're going to need a lot of heat, a lot of everything. So it's very costly. And we've been telling the prior administration, this administration, let's involve the community, not just our friends, our allies who helped us out in our campaign. So, they already spent $51 million. Out of the $51 million, 47 was spent in staffing. That's ridiculous. It should not be like that. And it's really not trickling down to the asylum seekers, because we still have them in police stations. They're still on the street. They're not being helped the right way. We could say we're doing this the right way, but in reality, the facts are there, and people are still being staying on the street. And we need to find a better solution by involving the community. Let us help them, because there's already a sentiment growing. The Venezolanos se les está dando todo. The Venezuelans are getting everything. And there's a division that's happening within the community. And that's where we're, as an organization, trying to make sure that, no, let me tell you the truth, that's not the way they're painting it. They're not getting everything. It's not that easy. It's been hard for us as an organization to even get help and get the attention of the political leaders, because they just don't want to work with you if you're not one of their allies or friends.
And Christina, there's many unanswered questions. What will you keep an eye on if the tent city plan does go into effect?
I think it's what we're talking, like an underlying concern is the continuity of care. There are some organizations like Erie Neighborhood House that are currently doing case management, providing comprehensive support and wraparound services. And so really keeping that at the forefront to make sure that they still are in contact with individuals that they've already built trust with. I think that would really help in thinking about how do we continue to keep in mind some of the challenges that we're going to be seeing, but also letting them know that there are still familiar faces there to help them through this process, as difficult as it may be.
Of course. Now, I've spoke with several groups who are already helping people like Baltasar, and they all ask the same question. Why is the city not giving money to support endeavors from local groups? Alderman Ramirez Rosa, can you give us perspective on this?
Well, I do want to address some of the things that were said here. So I think I don't use the word tent cities because I think it misrepresents what we're talking about here. We're talking about prefabricated shelters. We're talking about bathroom facilities. This is not like a shanty town camp. We're talking about a cafeteria. We're talking about recreational space. We're talking about a casework center. I wish that we could build a bunch of new buildings overnight. We can't. This administration has opened one brick and mortar shelter of a pace, one every 6 days. And despite that, we can't keep up with the buses that are coming. So we had to make the difficult decision of moving in this direction. And one thing that's also important to know is that these are not militarized facilities, right? It's not as if you're going to be locked in there. This is a facility where you're going to be treated with dignity, respect. And to make sure, to your point, that we are protecting the rights of people, we've started the conversation with immigration advocacy groups, including the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, the Resurrection Project. We've brought in mutual aid to have conversations with them. We've also brought in independent political organizations, grassroots community organizations, labor organizations. We've had a whole series of briefings this entire week and starting in last week to talk about what can we do collectively to make sure that everyone's rights are protected. So we're going to make sure that the immigration advocacy groups are present. We're going to make sure that we have civil rights groups presence there. I myself, as a member of the Latino caucus and as a progressive leader, I'm going to be there. But I want to say, in terms of getting money to the smaller groups, that's been an ongoing conversation. Some of these mutual aid groups do not have a 501c3 status. We also know that philanthropy has not really wanted to fund mutual aid. We have been going to them as a city and saying, hey, can you help us get some funds to these mutual aid groups? And what they've said is, that's not in our portfolio. I'm sure our sister here from Erie House is familiar with that language. So this is an ongoing effort. And at the end of the day, I just want to thank from the bottom of my heart people like you and our other mutual aid volunteers, because they have given so much and they've really exemplified the best of the city of Chicago. And I think that they speak to what our values are as a compassionate and welcoming city. And I hope that we, both at the federal level, state level, city level, and in the philanthropic private sector, can really match their same enthusiasm and their same commitment to this cause.
And I want to go to you. Have you asked the city for help?
So we've been meeting with the city weekly since June 8th, when we wrote a letter to the mayor's office that was published in many news outlets that was really making specific calls to say these are the problems that we're seeing on the ground. This is the support that we need. This is not the job of private citizens. I should not be the reason, I should not be the person who is making sure that literally 70 people have food and drinking water and children are going to school. This is not what we should be doing, as great as mutual aid and community groups do. I'm an organizer. More than I'm a volunteer, and I have to say this was in some ways this is both an opportunity and kind of a lost opportunity to capitalize on the involvement of volunteers and organizers throughout the city, and this was also something we brought to the mayor's office to say, incorporate us into your plans in a direct and substantive way. Partnership in this community, in this city, means money, and partnership means support in real material ways that we have just not seen at the city level. I completely agree with you, Alderman. We need investment on the part of the state, on the part of the Fed, anybody, and philanthropy. We know that we just had recent conversations with Chicago Philanthropy, which has been mulling this over for a while, which I understand. I hope that cavalry will arrive soon.
Yeah, and there's so we could talk about this all the time, and unfortunately we only have a couple seconds. Christina, I want to go to you. What has the journey been like for permanent housing now?
Yes, so we have been case managing a lot of the families, working with them, identifying their needs. We've been fortunate enough to receive some funds to help rapidly house some of the families. We've been able to house almost 75 families through some emergency assistance that was made available. We're also collaborating with Catholic Charities who help initiate the process, and then we make sure that families have the support that they need to fill out their application. So it's working. It does take a lot of conversation with property owners. They're private citizens, right? They want to also consider that they're going to get their payments, and so it's a lot of that relationship building that also takes a lot of time.
But I know there's so much even more to talk about, and we're going to continue to talk about this. Our thanks to Baltasar Enriquez, Cristina de la Rosa, Annie Gomberg, and Alderman Carlos Ramirez Rosa. Up next, variations of Spanish words we explain right after a look at the weather. You have probably had these debates before. Is it pop or soda, fireflies or lightning bugs, sneakers or tennis shoes, or even gym shoes? Well, just like the English language, in Spanish, there are different words people use to describe the same thing, depending on where they're from. So we headed out to ask people, ¿Cómo se dice la palabra? How do you say that word?
All right, so the first question is, where are you from?
Mexico.
You're from Mexico?
Yes.
And where do you live?
En El Paso, Texas.
So as we know, there's different words. There's different words that people say differently from whatever country they're from. So I'm just gonna tell you some words, you're gonna tell me how you say it, okay? In Spanish. All right, how do you say, like, car?
Carro.
Okay, carro. All right, how do you say beer?
Cerveza.
How do you say cake?
Pastel.
The next word would be cake.
Cake, pastel, torta, queque. En Chile diríamos, en el cake diríamos un queque.
How do you say cake?
Keke.
Keke? Really? Because we say pastel.
Yeah, for the most part, when I was introduced here in the United States, a lot of people say pastel. But over there in Honduras, we say keke.
The last one I have here is the bus.
Camión.
Camión.
And in the borderline we say ruta.
Ruta.
Ruta. Ahí viene la ruta.
Because ruta could mean just like the route. Bus.
Bus. Autobús.
Passion fruit.
Uy, ya no recuerdo.
Maracuyá.
Ah, no. Maracuyá.
Passion fruit.
Passion fruit. Bueno, for the most part, I do not know, to be honest with you.
So, I learned because, I didn't know how to even say it in Spanish, but fruta pasión, or people say maracuya.
Maracuya, that's right. That is right, though.
Clearly, everyone had a hard time saying passion fruit, maracuya. And that's our show tonight. Be sure to check our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 7 for the weekend review. Now, from all of us here at Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, I'm Joanna Hernandez. Stay healthy and safe. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm dedicated to preserving the dignity and rights of all individuals.